The morning sun shone through the windows of the Thompson mansion. Robert Thompson smiled at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his expensive tie. At 45 years old, he had everything a man could want. He ran the biggest real estate company in Chicago, had a beautiful fiancée and more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. "The guests are arriving," his sister Catherine said, peeking into his room. She was wearing a blue dress that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Robert nodded, but something didn't feel right. Maybe it was the way his fiancée, Victoria, had been acting lately. Ever since he'd made her the head of marketing at his company, she seemed more interested in appearing in magazines than spending time with him. "I need some air," Robert told his sister. He grabbed his car keys and headed to his Mercedes, ignoring Catherine's protests that he shouldn't leave right before the wedding. The road to the mansion was empty that morning. Robert always drove here when he needed to think. The cool spring air came through the windows and he started to relax. That's when it happened. A deer jumped onto the road. Robert swerved to avoid it, and everything went black. When he opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital room. The beeping of machines filled his ears, and a gentle voice was talking to him. It wasn't Victoria's voice, it was softer, warmer, somehow. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I brought you fresh flowers today. The doctors say talking to patients in comas helps them recover, so I hope you don't mind me chatting while I clean." It was Maria Delgado, one of the hospital's cleaning staff. She was 38, with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile. Unlike the parade of rich visitors who came to see Robert, she actually spent time with him, talking about her life, her dreams, and even reading to him. Days turned into weeks. Victoria's visits became shorter and shorter. She always came when the photographers were there, posing beside Robert's bed in designer outfits. "Oh, darling," she would say, barely touching his hand. "You need to wake up soon. The wedding planners are getting impatient." Maria watched it all while cleaning the room. She noticed how Victoria would check her phone constantly, how she never stayed more than 15 minutes. It made her angry, but she kept quiet. At night, when the hospital was quiet, Maria would sit next to Robert's bed during her breaks. She'd tell him about her day, about her daughter in college studying to become a doctor, about the little things that made life beautiful. "You know, Mr. Thompson," she said one night while arranging his pillows, "I've seen a lot of people in comas during my 15 years working here. The ones who wake up are usually the ones who have something to fight for. I hope you find your reason." What Maria didn't know was that strange things were happening at Thompson Real Estate. Robert's younger brother, James, had called an emergency board meeting. Using an old power of attorney, he was slowly taking control of the company. "It's temporary," he assured the board members, but his eyes told a different story, especially when he started meeting secretly with Robert's biggest competitor, Marcus Chen. Victoria was part of it too. Maria overheard her talking to James in the hallway late one night. "How much longer do we have to wait?" Victoria asked. "The press is starting to ask questions about the wedding." "Just a few more weeks," James replied. "Once we've transferred most of the assets, it won't matter if he wakes up or not." Maria's heart raced as she listened. She wanted to tell someone, but who would believe a cleaning lady over the word of rich executives? Instead, she started telling Robert everything she heard during their nightly talks. "They're trying to steal your company, Mr. Thompson," she whispered one night, holding his hand. "I know I'm just the cleaning lady, but I couldn't stay quiet. You need to wake up. You need to fight." And then, for the first time in weeks, she felt his hand squeeze hers. It was weak, but it was there. The heart monitor showed a small change, and Maria smiled through her tears. That night, she stayed past her shift, just holding his hand and talking softly about hope and second chances. Outside the window, Chicago's lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in that quiet hospital room, a love story was beginning, one that would shock the city's elite and prove that true love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. The next morning, Maria rushed to work earlier than usual. Her heart was still racing from what had happened the night before. Robert Thompson had squeezed her hand. She knew she had to tell the doctors, but something made her hesitate. What if they stopped her from spending time with him? Dr. Sarah Chen was doing her morning rounds when she noticed something different about Robert's vital signs. His brain activity has increased, she told the nurses. This is a good sign. Victoria arrived at her usual time, exactly when the society photographers were setting up outside the hospital. Today she was wearing a red designer dress and diamond earrings that sparkled under the hospital lights. "Oh, Robert," she sighed dramatically for the cameras. "I've been so lost without you. The charity ball next week won't be the same without my handsome fiancé." Maria was mopping the floor nearby, watching as Victoria posed for pictures beside Robert's bed. She never stayed long enough to notice the small changes, how his fingers would sometimes twitch, or how his breathing would change when someone talked to him. That afternoon, James Thompson arrived with 2 lawyers. Maria overheard them talking about transferring more company shares. She felt helpless, knowing what they were doing but unable to stop them. "Your brother's condition is stable," one of the lawyers said. "But the company needs active leadership. The board will support making your temporary position permanent." James smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "It's what Robert would want. Someone has to protect the family legacy." After they left, Maria went in to clean the room. Her hands were shaking with anger as she changed the water in the flower vase. "Your brother is stealing everything," she whispered to Robert. "But I've seen you fight. I know you're still in there." That night, Maria brought a newspaper to read to him. She always read him the business section first, keeping him updated about his company. Then she would read him the comics, because she believed everyone needed something to smile about. "Your company's stock dropped again today," she said softly. "James announced a new partnership with Chen Industries, the same Marcus Chen who tried to buy you out last year. Remember when you told me that story, about how he tried to trick you into selling?" Maria had learned a lot about business just from taking care of Robert. She'd picked up terms like hostile takeover and board of directors from the conversations she overheard. Sometimes she would look things up on her phone during breaks, trying to understand better what was happening. "My daughter Teresa says I should mind my own business," Maria admitted, adjusting Robert's blanket. "She worries about me getting too involved, but she doesn't understand. I've watched too many people walk in and out of this room, pretending to care about you while plotting behind your back. Someone has to be on your side." Just then, the night nurse came in to check Robert's vitals. "Maria, you're still here? Your shift ended an hour ago." Maria smiled sheepishly. "Just finishing up, Betty. You know how I like to make sure everything's perfect." Betty shook her head but smiled. Everyone at the hospital knew about Maria's dedication to her patients, especially Robert Thompson. Some of the nurses thought she was crazy for spending so much time with a man who might never wake up. Others thought it was sweet, in a sad kind of way. What none of them knew was that Maria's feelings for Robert had grown deeper than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just about protecting him from his greedy family anymore. Somewhere between the late-night talks and the quiet moments of care, she had fallen in love with him. "I know it's foolish," she whispered after Betty left. "A cleaning lady falling for a millionaire. It's like something out of those romance novels my mother used to read. But you're not like them, Robert. You're kind. The way you talk about helping people, about building homes for families, not just making money. I wish you could wake up and show them all who you really are." As if in response, Robert's fingers twitched again. The movement was stronger this time, and Maria's heart skipped a beat. She pressed the call button, and within minutes Dr. Chen was back in the room. "His responses are getting stronger," Dr. Chen said, checking his reflexes. "If this continues, he might be waking up soon." Maria felt tears in her eyes. Hope was a dangerous thing in a hospital. She knew that better than most. But watching Robert's face in the soft light of the medical monitors, she allowed herself to dream of the day when those kind eyes would open again. What she didn't know was that across town, in a luxurious restaurant, James Thompson and Victoria were having dinner with Marcus Chen, making plans that would change everything. The bottle of champagne on their table wasn't just for celebration. It was for plotting the final stage of their takeover, and they needed to move fast before Robert had a chance to wake up. The restaurant was almost empty when James Thompson raised his glass. "To our new partnership," he said, smiling at Marcus Chen. By this time next month, Thompson Real Estate will be under new management. Victoria touched up her lipstick, barely hiding her impatience. And what about me? I can't keep telling the press I'm waiting for Robert to wake up. People are starting to talk. Marcus Chen leaned back in his chair, his expensive suit matching his calculating smile. Once the merger is complete, you'll get your share, Victoria. $20 million should help ease your broken heart, don't you think? They all laughed, not knowing that at that exact moment, Robert Thompson's condition was changing. Back at the hospital, Maria was getting ready to leave when she heard a commotion in Robert's room. Dr. Chen and 2 nurses were rushing inside. Maria's heart stopped. After 15 years working in hospitals, she knew that sudden movements like this could mean either very good news or very bad news. His brain activity is spiking, one of the nurses said. Call Dr. Matthews. Maria stood. In the doorway, her hands clasped together in prayer. She watched as the medical team worked, checking monitors and adjusting equipment. Dr. Chen was shining a light in Robert's eyes, and then something miraculous happened. Robert Thompson opened his eyes. It wasn't like in the movies. He didn't just wake up and start talking. His eyes opened slowly, confused, trying to focus on the faces around him. But when his gaze found Maria standing in the doorway, something changed in his expression. Take it easy, Mr. Thompson, Dr. Chen said, checking his vital signs. You've been in a coma for almost 2 months. Try not to move too much. The next few hours were a blur of tests and examinations. The hospital staff called James Thompson, who said he would come first thing in the morning. Victoria's phone went straight to voicemail. Nobody thought to thank Maria, who stayed past her shift again, watching from the hallway as doctors went in and out of Robert's room. Finally, around midnight, things calmed down. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the night shift nurses. Maria was about to leave when she heard a weak voice calling from Robert's room. Wait, please. She turned around. Robert was looking at her, his eyes tired but alert. You're the one who's been talking to me. Maria felt her cheeks get warm. You could hear me? Not everything, he said, his voice rough from months of not being used. But your voice, it was like a light in the darkness. You read to me. Tears filled Maria's eyes. I didn't think you could really hear me. I heard enough. Robert tried to smile, but it was clear he was fighting to stay awake. You were the only one who told me the truth about what was happening. Before Maria could respond, Betty, the night nurse, came in. Maria, you should have gone home hours ago, and Mr. Thompson needs his rest. Maria nodded, quickly wiping her eyes. Of course, I'm sorry. I'll just finish cleaning, and tomorrow, Robert said, his eyes already closing. Please come back tomorrow. I need to know everything. That night, Maria barely slept. She kept thinking about Robert's eyes when he looked at her, about the fact that he had heard her all those times she sat with him. Part of her was embarrassed. Had he heard all her personal stories, her confessions? But another part felt a hope so strong it almost hurt. The next morning, everything changed. James Thompson arrived at the hospital with a team of lawyers and private doctors. They took over Robert's entire floor, restricting access to only approved personnel. Maria watched from the nurses' station as expensive suits walked in and out of his room, carrying papers and talking in hushed voices. Victoria finally showed up around noon, wearing a white dress that made her look like she was already wearing a wedding gown. She had brought a TV crew with her, giving an emotional interview about her endless faith that her fiancé would wake up. Love conquers all, she said to the cameras, wiping away tears that somehow didn't smudge her perfect makeup. I never lost hope, Maria wanted to scream. She wanted to tell everyone how Victoria had barely visited, how she had been plotting with James the whole time. But who would believe a cleaning lady over the beautiful fiancé who looked like she had walked out of a magazine cover? Instead, Maria did what she had always done. She worked quietly, keeping her eyes open and her ears sharp. She noticed how James kept making phone calls in the hallway, speaking in angry whispers about moving up the timeline and securing the votes. She also noticed how Robert kept asking the nurses about her. Where's Maria? She heard him say. I need to talk to her. But every time she tried to enter his room, someone stopped her. Family only, they would say, or Mr. Thompson is in a meeting." By the end of the day, Maria felt defeated. She was putting her cleaning supplies away when Dr. Chen found her. "He's been asking for you," the doctor said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it, a coma patient remembering conversations from when they were unconscious. You must have made quite an impression." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. "But his family won't let me near him." Dr. Chen smiled. "Well, his room will need to be cleaned after visiting hours. Around 9 tonight, I believe. Medical staff only, no lawyers allowed." For the first time that day, Maria smiled. Sometimes angels wore doctor's coats instead of wings. She just hoped she would get the chance to tell Robert everything she knew before it was too late. Because if the conversation she had overheard between James and Marcus Chen was true, they were planning to have the board vote tomorrow. A vote that would strip Robert of his company forever. 9 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. Maria's hands shook as she pushed her cleaning cart down the quiet hospital corridor. Most of the visitors had gone home, leaving only the soft beeping of machines and the squeak of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. Dr. Chen nodded to her as she approached Robert's room. "Take your time," she said quietly. "The night shift won't start their rounds for another hour." Inside, Robert was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had that morning. His eyes lit up when he saw Maria, and he immediately tried to sit up straighter. "I was starting to think they'd found a way to keep you away forever," he said, his voice stronger than the day before. Maria quickly closed the door behind her. "Your brother has the whole floor locked down like Fort Knox. But they can't stop the cleaning staff from doing their job. James," Robert's face darkened, "I've been trying to piece everything together. These past 2 months feel like a fog, but I remember your voice. You were telling me about the company, about the deals he was making." Maria nodded, setting down her cleaning supplies. "They're planning something big. Tonight, I overheard your brother on the phone with Marcus Chen. There's a board meeting tomorrow morning." "Marcus Chen," Robert's hands gripped the bedsheets. "He's been trying to take over my company for years. What else do you know?" Maria told him everything. About the secret meetings, about Victoria's involvement, about the plans she'd overheard. As she spoke, she watched Robert's face change from confusion to anger to determination. "I need to make some calls," he said, reaching for the phone beside his bed. "But they took my cell phone, and I'm sure James has convinced everyone I'm not well enough for business decisions." "Use my phone," Maria said, pulling her simple flip phone from her pocket. "It's not fancy, but it works." Robert smiled at her. "You're still saving me, aren't you?" His words made her heart skip a beat, but she tried to stay focused. This wasn't about her feelings. It was about stopping his family from stealing everything from him. Robert made call after call, but most went to voicemail. It was late, and James had had 2 months to convince everyone that Robert was out of commission. Finally, on the 7th try, someone answered. "Judge Williams?" "Yes, it's really me. I need your help. It's about the company." Maria pretended to clean while Robert talked, keeping an eye on the door. She heard him explaining about the coma, about James's manipulation, about the emergency board meeting planned for tomorrow. "I understand," he said, finally hanging up. "The judge is sending his clerk over tonight with some emergency papers, but we need more proof of what they're planning." "Maybe I can help with that," Maria said. "I know where James keeps his briefcase. When he visits, he always puts it in the same chair by the window, and he's coming back first thing in the morning for one last meeting before heading to the board." Robert's eyes widened. "Maria, no, it's too risky. If they catch you looking through his things—" "They won't," she said firmly. "I've been cleaning these rooms for 15 years. I'm invisible to people like your brother. They look right through me." Just then, they heard voices in the hallway. Maria quickly grabbed her mop, making it look like she was working. A moment later, Victoria walked in, followed by a photographer. "Darling," she exclaimed, then stopped short when she saw Maria. "What is she doing here?" "Cleaning," Maria said quietly, keeping her eyes down. "Hospital policy." Victoria wrinkled her nose. "Well, hurry up. I need a moment alone with my fiancé." Robert's voice was cold. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of her." Victoria's perfect smile faltered for a moment. "Don't be silly, darling. You've been through so much. The doctors say you need to stay calm, not worry about anything. The doctors? Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the private doctors James brought in? The ones who keep trying to convince me I'm not strong enough to leave this bed? The photographer was looking uncomfortable, backing toward the door. Victoria's smile was completely gone now. I don't know what this cleaning woman has been telling you, but her name is Maria, Robert interrupted, and she's the only person in this room I trust right now. Victoria's face turned red. She spun around and stormed out, the photographer hurrying after her. As soon as they were gone, Maria rushed to close the door. She'll go straight to your brother, she said worriedly. Robert nodded. Good. Let her. The more rattled they are, the more likely they are to make mistakes. He reached for Maria's hand. But you need to be careful. These people, they're not used to losing. Maria squeezed his hand, trying to ignore how natural it felt, how warm his skin was against hers. I've spent my whole life being careful, but some things are worth the risk. Outside the room, the hospital was settling into its quiet nighttime rhythm, but inside plans were being made, alliances were shifting, and hearts were opening to possibilities that neither of them had dared to dream of before. They had until morning to gather the evidence they needed. After that, everything would change, for better or worse. The game James and Victoria had been playing was about to backfire, but only if Maria could pull off one last cleaning job without getting caught. The hospital was eerily quiet at 5 in the morning. Maria had gone home for a few hours, but she couldn't sleep. Now she was back, her heart pounding as she pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridor. The early morning shift wouldn't start for another hour. This was her chance. James Thompson always arrived at 6 sharp for his morning meetings. Maria knew his routine by now. He would stop at the coffee shop across the street, then spend exactly 20 minutes in Robert's room before heading to the office. He always left his briefcase in the same spot while he got his coffee. Be careful, Robert had told her before she left last night. These documents aren't worth risking your job over, but Maria knew better. She had seen too many families torn apart by money and greed during her years at the hospital. She wasn't about to let it happen to Robert. The sun was just starting to peek through the windows when James walked in right on schedule. He barely glanced at Maria as she mopped the floor near the coffee station. Morning, he muttered, setting down his briefcase to pour himself a cup of coffee. Maria kept her eyes down, but her heart was racing. This was her chance. As James turned to add cream to his coffee, she accidentally bumped her mop bucket against his leg. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she exclaimed, grabbing paper towels. "Let me clean that up right away." Water had splashed on his expensive shoes and the bottom of his pants. James jumped back, cursing. Just clean it up," he snapped, heading to the bathroom to dry off. The moment he was gone, Maria moved fast. She opened his briefcase just enough to slide out a folder marked Board Meeting Confidential. Her hands shaking, she used her phone to take pictures of every page. She had just clicked the briefcase shut when James returned, still dabbing at his pants with paper towels. "Those shoes are Italian leather," he complained. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll pay for the cleaning," Maria said, keeping her voice humble and scared. James waved her off. "Just stay out of my way." He grabbed his briefcase and coffee, heading toward Robert's room. Maria waited until he was gone before hurrying to the staff bathroom. Her hands were shaking as she looked through the photos on her phone. What she saw made her gasp. The documents detailed everything: the secret deals with Marcus, Chen, the plan to declare Robert mentally unfit to run the company, even copies of forged medical reports claiming he had brain damage from the coma. They had thought of everything, but they hadn't thought of her. When she got to Robert's room, James had already left for his office. Robert was sitting up in bed, looking worried. "Did you get them?" he asked as soon as she closed the door. Maria nodded, pulling out her phone. "Everything. The whole plan. Look at this." They spent the next hour going through the documents. Robert's face got darker with each page. "They've been planning this since the day of my accident," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Victoria, she helped them set everything up. They were counting on me never waking up." Maria put her hand over his without thinking. "But you did wake up, and now we have proof." Robert looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. "Why are you helping me? Really? You could lose your job over this. Maria started to pull her hand away, but Robert held on. Because... She hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. Because during all those nights I spent talking to you, reading to you, I saw who you really are. Not the rich businessman everyone talks about, but the man who cares about building homes for families, who remembers all his employees' names, who wants to make a difference. That man is worth fighting for. Robert's eyes softened. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the door burst open. Victoria stood there wearing another designer outfit, her face furious. "What is going on here?" she demanded, staring at their joined hands. Robert didn't let go of Maria's hand. Instead, he squeezed it tighter. "Victoria, I was wondering when you'd show up. We need to talk." "About what? How you're holding hands with the cleaning lady? What would people say?" "They might say the same things they'd say about a woman who conspires to steal from her fiancé while he's in a coma," Robert replied calmly. Victoria's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Robert reached for Maria's phone. "And in about an hour the board members will know too, including the part where you and James plan to split my company with Marcus Chen." Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," Maria spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt, "we can prove everything." Victoria's eyes darted between them, realization dawning on her face. Without another word, she turned and ran from the room. They could hear her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. "She's going to warn James," Maria said worriedly. Robert smiled, and for the first time since waking up, he looked like the powerful businessman he was. "Let her. By the time they figure out what's happening, it'll be too late. Judge Williams is already on his way with an emergency injunction. But first," he tugged gently on Maria's hand, pulling her closer. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been trying to say since I first opened my eyes and saw you standing there." But before he could finish, alarms started blaring throughout the hospital. The overhead speakers crackled to life. "Code Blue, main lobby. Code Blue, main lobby." Maria's blood ran cold. She knew that code. It meant someone had collapsed, and she had a terrible feeling she knew who it was. Maria and Robert looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Without a word, Maria rushed to the door, looking down the hallway toward the elevators. She could see hospital staff running toward the lobby. "I have to go check," she said. "Something's wrong." Robert tried to get out of bed. "I'm coming with you." "No," Maria said firmly, using the voice she'd developed over 15 years of handling. Stubborn patience. "You're still recovering. I'll go see what's happening and come right back." She hurried to the lobby, her heart pounding. The scene that greeted her was chaos. James Thompson was on the floor, clutching his chest while doctors worked around him. Victoria was there too, screaming into her phone. "I don't care what you have to do," she was saying. "Get those papers signed before the board meeting. We're running out of time." Dr. Chen pushed through the crowd. "It looks like a heart attack. We need to get him to the cardiac unit now." Maria watched as they loaded James onto a stretcher. Even in the middle of a medical emergency, he was still trying to talk, still trying to give orders. "The meeting," he gasped. "Marcus Chen, the contracts." Victoria grabbed his hand. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." But Maria could see the look in Victoria's eyes. It wasn't concern for James, it was panic. Their carefully planned scheme was falling apart. Maria slipped away from the crowd and ran back to Robert's room. She found him sitting on the edge of his bed, already dressed in clothes that someone had brought from his home. James had a heart attack, she said, catching her breath. "They're taking him to the cardiac unit, but Victoria, she's still trying to push through the board meeting. She was on the phone with someone about getting papers signed." Robert nodded, standing up carefully. "Help me to the door. If I know Victoria, she's already on her way to the office. We need to stop her before she does something that ruins both her and my brother. But you're not strong enough, Maria." He took her hands in his. "I've been lying in that bed for 2 months while they plotted to steal everything I've worked for, everything my father built. I'm not letting them destroy it all because they got greedy." Just then, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Thompson, you shouldn't be out of bed." "Sarah," Robert said, recognizing the doctor who had been caring for him. "I know you're worried, but right now I need your help. My company, my father's legacy, is about to be stolen by people who care more about money than about the thousands of families who depend on Thompson Real Estate for their homes and jobs. Dr. Chen looked between Robert and Maria, then sighed. "You're not technically cleared for release." "Please," Maria added, "we have proof of what they're doing. But if we don't stop them now, it'll be too late." After what felt like forever, Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll sign your release papers, but you have to promise to come back for a checkup tomorrow, and you'll need someone to keep an eye on you today." "I'll stay with him," Maria said without hesitation. Robert squeezed her hand. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Within minutes, they were in a taxi heading downtown to the Thompson Real Estate headquarters. Robert was quiet, staring out the window at the city he hadn't seen in 2 months. "I remember everything you told me," he said suddenly. "When I was in the coma, about your daughter in medical school, about growing up in Mexico, about your dreams of opening a small bookstore someday." Maria felt her cheeks get warm. "I talk too much." "No." Robert turned to look at her. "You gave me something to hold on to in the darkness. Your voice, your stories. They kept me fighting to find my way back." The taxi turned onto Michigan Avenue, where the Thompson building rose into the sky like a glass and steel giant. Maria had only seen it from the outside before, usually when she took the bus past it on her way to work. "Whatever happens up there," Robert said as they pulled up to the building, "I want you to know something. These past 2 months changed everything. Not just because you saved my company, but because you showed me what really matters. Money, power, social, status. None of it means anything without people you can trust. People who see you for who you really are." Maria's heart was beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. "Robert." But before she could say more, they saw Victoria rushing through the lobby doors, carrying James's briefcase. "She's heading to the boardroom," Robert said, his face hardening. "Are you ready?" Maria nodded, reaching into her pocket to make sure her phone with the evidence was still there. "Ready?" They got out of the taxi, Robert leaning slightly on Maria's arm for support. As they walked into the building, employees stopped and stared. Their boss, who everyone thought was still in a coma, walking in with a woman no one recognized. It was like something out of a movie. The security guard at the desk jumped to his feet. "Mr. Thompson, we thought—" "Hello, Frank," Robert said warmly. "My ID card seems to have gone missing while I was in the hospital. Would you mind letting us up to the boardroom?" Frank didn't hesitate. "Of course, sir. And welcome back." As they stepped into the elevator, Maria took a deep breath. She was about to walk into a room full of millionaire executives and face down one of the most powerful women in Chicago. But looking at Robert's reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The elevator started to rise, carrying them toward a confrontation that would change both their lives forever. Victoria might have money and power on her side, but Maria and Robert had something much stronger: the truth and each other. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor of Thompson Real Estate. Maria had never seen anything like it. Everything was glass and marble, with views of Chicago stretching out in every direction. Robert squeezed her hand as they heard voices coming from the boardroom. "The choice is simple," Victoria was saying. "With James in the hospital and Robert still recovering, the company needs strong leadership. The merger with Chen Industries is our best option." Robert and Maria stopped outside the door. Through the glass walls, they could see Victoria standing at the head of a long table, surrounded by serious-looking men and women in expensive suits. Marcus Chen sat near her, a smug smile on his face. "It's time," Robert whispered. He straightened his shoulders, and even though Maria knew he was still weak from the coma, in that moment he looked every inch the powerful CEO he was. They walked into the boardroom together. The reaction was immediate. People gasped, papers dropped, and Victoria's perfect smile froze on her face. "I believe you're sitting in my chair, Victoria," Robert said calmly. Marcus Chen recovered first. "Robert, what a surprise. We were just discussing how to steal my company." Robert moved to the head of the table, Maria staying close by his side. "Or were you discussing the forged medical reports claiming I have brain damage, the illegal transfer of company shares, the secret meetings with my competitor while I was fighting for my life?" Victoria's face had gone white. "What are you talking about?" "You're confused, darling. The doctors said you might have memory problems." "Show them," Robert said to Maria. With shaking hands, Maria pulled out her phone and connected it to the room's large screen. One by one, the photos of James's documents appeared. Contracts, bank transfers, fake medical reports, everything. "Who is she?" one of the board members asked, staring at Maria. "The woman who saved this company," Robert replied, "while my fiancée was plotting to steal it, and my brother was betraying our father's legacy. Maria was the only one telling me the truth, the only one fighting to protect what matters." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You can't believe some cleaning lady over me. I'm your fiancé." "Not anymore." Robert pulled off his engagement ring and set it on the table. "And Maria is a lot more than just a cleaning lady. She's the most honest, caring person I've ever met. When I was lost, in darkness, her voice guided me back. When everyone else saw a chance to profit from my condition, she saw a person who needed help." The boardroom was silent. Marcus Chen was slowly edging toward the door, but 2 security guards had appeared to block his way. "The evidence is clear," Robert continued. "Victoria and James conspired, with Marcus Chen to take over Thompson Real Estate through fraud and forgery. They were counting on me never waking up, never finding out the truth. But they didn't count on someone like Maria." One of the older board members, a woman with silver hair who had worked with Robert's father, stood up. "I move to immediately cancel any pending agreements with Chen Industries and launch a full investigation into these allegations." "Seconded," said another member. Victoria looked around desperately, but she could see she was losing. Her perfect world was crumbling around her. "You'll regret this," she spat at Maria. "You're nothing, just a cleaning lady who got lucky." Maria, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "You're right, I am a cleaning lady. I clean up messes for a living. And right now, I'm helping clean up the biggest mess of all. The one you made when you chose greed over love." Security guards appeared to escort Victoria and Marcus Chen out. As they left, Victoria turned back one last time. "James will never let you get away with this." But Robert wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was looking at Maria, his eyes full of something that made her heart skip a beat. The board members were talking all at once now, asking questions, demanding explanations, but Robert held up his hand. "I know you all have questions, and I promise to answer them all, but first..." He swayed slightly, and Maria quickly moved to support him. "I think I need to sit down." "You need to rest," Maria said firmly. "You're still recovering." The silver-haired board member, Mrs. Anderson, according to her nameplate, nodded. "The meeting is adjourned until tomorrow. Robert, go home and rest. We'll handle things here." As they headed back to the elevator, Robert leaned more heavily on Maria. The confrontation had taken a lot out of him. "I meant what I said in there," he told her softly, "about you being more than just a cleaning lady. You're the woman who saved my life, my company, and my heart." Maria felt tears in her eyes. "Robert, I know it sounds crazy. 2 months ago, we were from completely different worlds. But lying in that hospital bed, listening to your voice, getting to know your heart, I realized something. Our worlds were different, but our hearts speak the same language." The elevator doors closed, giving them a moment of privacy. Robert reached up to touch Maria's cheek, wiping away a tear. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know this is all happening so fast, but I want you to know that whatever happens next, you'll always have a place in my life. If you want it." Maria looked into his eyes, seeing not the billionaire CEO or the coma patient, but simply the man she had fallen in love with during those quiet hospital nights. But before she could answer, Robert's phone rang. It was the hospital. James's condition had taken a turn for the worse, and he was asking for his brother. Their moment of peace was over. The drama wasn't finished yet. It was just beginning a new chapter. The ride back to the hospital was tense. Robert held Maria's hand the whole way, but his mind was clearly on his brother. No matter what James had done, he was still family. When they arrived at the cardiac unit, they found Dr. Chen waiting for them. "He's stable for now," she said, "but he's asking for you, Robert, and he seems agitated." Robert looked at Maria. "Come with me," she nodded. After everything they'd been through, she wasn't about to leave his side now. James was lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller somehow without his expensive suit and confident smile. When he saw Robert and Maria enter the room, his face twisted, with anger. "You!" He tried to sit up, but the monitors started beeping faster. "You ruined everything!" "Lie back, James," Robert said calmly. "You're going to give yourself another heart attack. Why couldn't you just stay in that coma?" James's voice was bitter. Everything was finally going to work out. The company would have been mine, like it should have been from the start. Maria felt Robert tense beside her, but his voice stayed steady. "The company was never supposed to be yours or mine. Dad built it to help people, to build homes and communities. But you forgot that, didn't you?" "Dad was a fool," James spat. "All that talk about helping people, about building a legacy. Meanwhile, Marcus Chen and his company were making billions by buying up properties and turning them into luxury condos. And how many families would have lost their homes if your plan had worked?" Robert asked. "How many people would have been forced out of their neighborhoods?" James looked away, but his heart monitor was still beeping too fast. Dr. Chen stepped forward. "That's enough excitement for now," she said firmly. "Mr. Thompson needs rest." But James wasn't finished. He looked at Maria with contempt. "And you, the cleaning lady who thinks she can play in our world. Do you really think it'll last? That my brother will stay with someone like you once the novelty wears off?" Maria felt the words like a slap, but before she could respond, Robert stepped forward. "That's enough, James. Maria is twice the person you or Victoria will ever be. She saved this family's legacy while you were trying to destroy it." "Family legacy?" James laughed, but it turned into a cough. "Look around, brother. What family? Our parents are gone. You're in love with the help, and I'm probably going to jail. Some legacy." "It doesn't have to be this way," Robert said softly. "Confess what you did. Help us fix this. We can still be brothers." For a moment, something flickered in James's eyes. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. But then, his face hardened again. "Get out," he whispered. "Both of you, get out." In the hallway, Robert leaned against the wall, suddenly looking tired. Maria put her hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I keep thinking about what he said. About family, about legacy. Maybe he's right. Maybe everything is broken beyond repair." "Hey," Maria made him look at her. "Nothing is beyond repair if you have love and hope. Your father knew that. That's why he built homes for families, not just buildings for profit." Robert's eyes softened as he looked at her. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Practice," she smiled. "I've had a lot of conversations with you over the past 2 months, remember?" He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. For a moment, they just stood there in the hospital hallway, finding comfort in each other's presence. Then Robert's phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Anderson from the board. "The police are here," she said. "They want to talk to both of you about Victoria and the forged documents." Just then they heard shouting from James's room. Dr. Chen ran past them, followed by a team of nurses. "Code Blue," someone yelled. "He's crashing." Robert started to run toward the room, but Dr. Chen stopped him. "Let us work," she said. "Stay here." Maria held Robert's hand as they watched the medical team work on James. The same hallway where she had spent so many nights talking to Robert during his coma was now the scene of another family drama. Through the window, they could see the doctors using the defibrillator. James's body jerked with each shock. "Come on, James," Robert whispered. "Don't do this, don't let it end this way." Maria squeezed his hand, praying silently. She had seen enough death in her years at the hospital to know that sometimes, despite everything, love wasn't enough to save someone. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to help the ones left behind heal. The minutes ticked by like hours. In the distance, they could hear police sirens getting closer. The story that had started with one brother in a coma was now racing toward its conclusion, with another brother fighting for his life. And through it all, a cleaning lady and a billionaire held on to each other, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories happen in the most unexpected places. The police arrived just as Dr. Chen came out of James's room. Her face was tired but relieved. "We got him back," she said. "He's stable but weak. The next 24 hours will be critical. Robert let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Can I see him?" "In a little while. Right now, I think these officers need to speak with you." Two detectives introduced themselves, Detective Martinez and Detective Rogers. They had already arrested Victoria and Marcus Chen at the Thompson building. "We need your statements," Detective Martinez said, "and all the evidence you have about the forged documents." Maria handed over her phone with the photos. As she and Robert told their story, the detectives took detailed notes. Sometimes they would stop to ask questions, especially about the timing of events and who was present at different meetings. "It's a solid case," Detective Rogers said finally. "Fraud, conspiracy, attempted corporate theft. They're looking at serious prison time." "What about my brother?" Robert asked. "He's in no condition to be arrested right now." "We'll post an officer outside his room," Detective Martinez said. "But you're right, his health comes first. We'll deal with the legal issues once he's stable." After the detectives left, Robert and Maria sat in the waiting room. The events of the day felt almost unreal, like something out of one of the romance novels Maria sometimes read during her breaks. "I can't believe it's only been 3 days since I woke up," Robert said, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like a lifetime." "A lot can change in 3 days," Maria replied softly. Robert took her hand, tracing small circles on her palm with his thumb. "You know what hasn't changed? The way I feel when I hear your voice. Even before I opened my eyes, your voice was my anchor, my way back to life." Maria felt tears threatening to fall. "Robert, I know everyone will say it's too fast, that we're from different worlds, that it can't work." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "But they don't know what we know. They haven't been through what we've been through." Just then, Maria's phone rang. It was her daughter, Teresa. "Mama," Teresa sounded worried. "Are you okay? Your picture is all over the news. They're saying you helped save Thompson Real Estate from a hostile takeover." Maria looked at Robert and smiled. "I'm fine, mi amor, better than fine. But we need to talk. Can you come to the hospital?" After she hung up, Robert squeezed her hand. "Are you ready for this? Once the press gets hold of our story, everything will change. Your life won't be private anymore." "I don't care about that," Maria said. "I care about you, about us. The rest, we'll figure it out together." A nurse came to tell them they could see James. He was awake but very weak. When they entered his room, he looked at them with tired eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was so angry, so jealous, I let it poison everything." Robert went to his brother's side. "We can fix this, James. It won't be easy, but we can try." James looked at Maria. "I judged you wrong. Both of you. Love. Real love. I forgot what that looks like." Maria felt Robert's arms slip around her waist, pulling her close. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the hallway. Teresa had arrived, and she wasn't alone. Mrs. Anderson and several other board members were with her mama. Teresa rushed in, stopping short when she saw Robert's arm around her mother. Oh, Mrs. Anderson stepped forward, smiling. "We've been looking everywhere for you two. The press is having a field day with the story. Cleaning lady saves billionaire's empire. The headlines are incredible." "And that's not all," one of the other board members added. "Our phones have been ringing off the hook. People love this story. They're calling it a modern fairy tale." Maria felt overwhelmed. This wasn't what she had wanted. All this attention, all these people looking at her. But then she felt Robert's arm tighten around her waist. Heard his voice, strong and sure. "This isn't a fairy tale," he said. "Fairy tales are about magic and destiny. This is about choice. About seeing someone's true heart and choosing to love them, no matter what the world thinks." Teresa was looking at her mother with new eyes. "Mama, are you happy?" Maria looked up at Robert, then back at her daughter. "Yes, mi amor. For the first time in a very long time, I'm truly happy." James watched from his hospital bed, a strange look on his face. Maybe it was regret for what he'd almost destroyed, or maybe it was hope for what could still be saved. Outside the room, reporters were gathering, cameras were flashing, and the whole world was waiting to hear their story. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the way Robert looked at Maria, the way their hearts beat in sync, the way love had found them in the most unexpected place and transformed everything. The cleaning lady and the billionaire, the woman who saved his life and the man who gave her a new one. Their story was just beginning, and it was better than any fairy tale because it was real. Real love, real choices, real hope. And in the end, that's all anyone really needs. 1 year later, the gardens of the Thompson estate were once again decorated with white flowers. But this time everything was different. Maria stood in front of a mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, just like she had wanted. Teresa stood behind her, adjusting the veil with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, Mama," she said, hugging her mother carefully to avoid wrinkling the dress. So much had changed in the past year. Victoria and Marcus Chen had gone to prison for fraud. James, after recovering from his heart attack, had confessed everything and made a deal with the prosecutors. He was serving his sentence under house arrest, working with charitable organizations that helped low-income families find affordable housing. The press had gone crazy with the story at first. Cleaning lady steals billionaire's heart was just one of the many headlines. Some people had been cruel, calling Maria a gold digger, saying it wouldn't last. But Robert had stood by her through it all. He didn't care what people said. He loved her, and he made sure everyone knew it. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Anderson asked, peeking into the room. The silver-haired board member had become one of Maria's closest friends over the past year. She had helped Maria navigate her new world without losing herself in it. Maria took a deep breath. Ready. The garden was full of guests, hospital staff who had worked with Maria for years, board members who had become friends, and even some of the families who lived in Thompson Real Estate's affordable housing developments. Maria had insisted on inviting them, and Robert had loved the idea. Dr. Chen was there with her husband. Betty, the night nurse who had helped Maria spend time with Robert during his coma, sat in the front row. Even some of the detectives who had worked on the case had come to celebrate. As the music started playing, Maria felt her heart racing, but then she saw Robert waiting for her at the altar, and everything else faded away. He still looked at her the same way he had in the hospital, like she was the most precious thing in the world. She had worried that his feelings might change once he fully recovered, once the drama was over, but they had only grown stronger. James was there too, standing with the guests, looking healthier than he had in years. The house arrest anklet was visible under his suit pants, but his smile was genuine. The past year of working with charity organizations had changed him. He had found a new purpose, a way to make amends. As Maria walked down the aisle on Teresa's arm, she thought about all. The night she had spent talking to Robert while he was in the coma. She had told him her dreams then, about wanting to open a small bookstore, about hoping to see Teresa graduate from medical school, about wanting to make a difference in people's lives. Now all those dreams were coming true, but in ways she never could have imagined. The bookstore was opening next month, a community space in one of Thompson Real Estate's developments, where local kids could read and study. Teresa was finishing her last year of medical school with no student loans to worry about. And together, Maria and Robert had started a foundation to help hospital workers further their education. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the priest asked. Teresa's voice was strong and proud. "I do." As Maria took Robert's hand, she saw happy tears in his eyes. They had written their own vows, simple and true, just like their love. "Maria," Robert began, his voice full of emotion, "before I met you, I thought I had everything. But I was wrong. You showed me what real wealth is, the wealth of a caring heart, of unwavering loyalty, of pure love. You saved more than my life and my company. You saved my soul." Maria's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "Robert, you say I saved you, but you saved me too. You showed me that love doesn't care about where people come from or what they do for a living. You gave me the courage to be myself, to dream bigger, to love without fear." As they exchanged rings, the setting sun painted the sky in beautiful colors. Later, people would say it was like a scene from a movie, but for Maria and Robert, it was better than any movie because it was real. At the reception, James gave a speech that left everyone in tears. He talked about redemption, about second chances, about how love can heal even the deepest wounds. "My brother and Maria taught me something important," he said, his voice humble. "True wealth isn't in bank accounts or business deals. It's in the hearts we touch, the lives we change, the love we share." As Maria and Robert danced their first dance as husband and wife, she looked around at the faces of their guests, rich and poor, famous and ordinary, all celebrating together. "Happy?" Robert whispered in her ear. "More than happy," she replied. "Complete." Later that night, as they drove away from the reception, Maria saw the hospital in the distance, its lights shining in the darkness. That's where their story had begun. In a quiet room where a cleaning lady had talked to a man in a coma, not knowing she was falling in love. Now they were heading toward their future, toward more adventures, more challenges, more love. But they would face it all together, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories don't need magic or fairy godmothers. Sometimes they just need two hearts brave enough to see past the surface and love what they find underneath. And in the end, isn't that the most beautiful story of all?